Hi, so today's topic of discussion is going to be why people don't watch women's sports as much as they watch men's sports. And we want to inform the public about these differences and why people don't watch them as much. We're going to be hearing from four different team members at this time. Laura will be talking about what's popular in women's sports. Emily will be discussing the difference in sports between college and professional sports at those different levels. Billy will be discussing demographics, and Margot will be talking about the salary difference between men and women. So first we are going to hear from Laura about what's popular in women's sports.
Okay, so first I'm going to start talking about high school sports. Since 2009, the number of high schools with athletic programs for girls has increased steadily. Most schools have, basketball, track, volleyball, softball, cross country, soccer, and tennis. And then the most popular out of those sports in 2012 and 2013 were basketball, track, volleyball, and soccer. And then these trends obviously continue into college, but the number of women playing sports in college has increased by over 600% in the past few years. So women are definitely playing sports and the numbers are increasing, but that doesn't really answer what's popular in regards to what's being watched on TV. So I just want to give a little bit of background on that, and now I'll move on to the popular women's professional sports to watch. And despite participation levels and what you guys might think, the most popular sport to watch is women's tennis. So their popularity has been increasing thanks to players such as Maria Sharapova, Lena, and the Williams sisters. And interest in other sports like soccer and basketball might spike after tournaments or the Olympics, but this interest never lasts. Leagues can get started up and then they fold because they don't have enough funding because not enough people are watching. So why is tennis the most popular sport? The main reason is because Grand Slam tournaments, which are their big tournaments, feature both men's and women's players. In 2007, Wimbledon and the French Open joined the other two slams and offered equal prize money for both men and women, so that's huge. Smaller tournaments still have a pay gap, but the big ones are offering the same prizes. And then in some instances, women get to play on the more prestigious courts, or they even get to play before the male athletes, so the order in which they play does matter. And then because of this, women receive similar airtime on TV and media attention, because if people are there to film the men or interview the men, the women are there too, so they're going to get a lot of attention. And then as a result of having everyone play the same weekends at the same venue, the Grand Slam becomes more than just about watching men's tennis or women's tennis. It's about watching the sport and enjoying all of these talented players in one location. So a lot of the reason that tennis is so popular is because it's given equality more than a lot of other men's and women's sports. Excuse me. And then in addition to that, owners and people attribute social media to making a huge difference because it gives players a way to connect with their fans, and especially in times like this, that's really important to making the sport so popular.
All right, good. Thank you. I have a question that goes along with this. For instance, in the Olympics, there's a woman's sport for every man's sport. And do you think this affects the popularity in any way? Like, are people bound to watch one more than another because they're on equally? Do you think that forces people to watch one more than the other, or what are your thoughts on that?
I think that it helps a lot, because if you're tuning in to watch one sport, say men's, and then women's comes on after, you're definitely more likely to just stay tuned. And then when they're also being filmed at the same time, the level of the broadcast is better because men get, more cameras, better camera angles, more promotions and things like that. So when the women's sports are broadcasted in a similar way, it makes them a lot more exciting to watch and look a lot more legit, you could say.
Right. Okay, that's perfect. Okay, so now we're going to move on to our next discussion with Emily. She is going to be talking about the difference in sports between college and the professional levels.
Okay, so I talked about the professional aspect and the college aspect in professional and college sports. So first I'm going to talk about the professional sports world. One of the main problems in professional sports with people not watching women's sports is there's not enough media coverage. So one of the examples that I had was in tennis and figure skating, women's championships are often more popular among U.S. sports fans than men's, and coverage of those events correlates. But one thing that I found that was interesting was ratings for women's team sports, whether the women's NBA, college basketball, or soccer, don't even come close to the NBA men's college hoops or in the NFL. This was an interesting statistic, but the NBA's top-rated broadcast of 2014 was the final Game 5 game, which drew 18 million viewers. But then on the following night, the women's NBA's most-watched game, which happened to be Game 2 of the finals, had less than 5% of that audience on the same network. Another thing is the coverage differs between men and women's sports at the professional level. So the NCAA Final Four, you all hear about is the guys' teams. The Final Four teams for the men's NCAA basketball tournament, they got like the front page in the Monday's New York Times, but the woman there was a short story in the back, so the coverage is different between the two. Another problem in the difference between professional sports is more women in the professional world need to show their faces more. So I would argue that more women need to be on television and in the news and in front of young girls, so maybe they would get more people to actually watch their sporting event. Another thing that professional athletes for women's sports need is they need more sponsorship. So sponsors are unwilling to finance individuals and teams that don't get good exposure. So there's few female athletes that actually do get good exposure. One statistic I found was the Women's Sports and Fitness Foundation estimates that in 2013, women's sports received 7% of the coverage and a 0.4% of that total value of commercial sponsorship. So men get way more sponsorship than women do. Another thing is viewer interest is lacking in the college world. Men receive more college scholarships than women. There's a lack of acknowledgement towards women's sports, so the fan base needs to broaden in college sports. In other words, women's sports need to become more nationally recognized, and more women need to stick with their sports. And lastly, another thing that I found interesting in college sports was women's skills in college don't match men's. So, I mean, that kind of is why more people watch men's sports than women's.
Okay. I actually have a question going off of that. You said that women's skills don't match men's in college. A 1992 published journal stated that statistically, within the first half of the 21st century, women's skills should bypass men's. If this is true and this actually happens, do you think it would affect the popularity of the sports? Like, do you think more people would watch women that way?
I think it would depend on the sport, but I absolutely think that more people would watch if women's skills did match men's, because it would make the game more competitive and maybe a little bit more interesting.
Okay. Very good. Okay, next we're going to move on to Billy, and he is going to talk about the demographics.
This topic, I didn't really find like a specific group supported women's, but each different sport had like their own fan base. Like for example, women's college sports was filled mostly with like passionate fans from that college. What came up was how professional women's sports national teams that represented like the USA drew in like a much larger crowd that didn't even correspond with the viewership of women's professional sports overall. The teams were doing good. Other women's sports weren't really successful. It was in an article I was reading, an author talked about how the WNBA's fan base is partly made up of members of the LGBT community. And when this author attended one of the games, she noticed that the atmosphere was more of like those who really didn't fit in with society. So I thought that was definitely interesting. But since we're talking about why women's professional sports aren't really that supported, many people believe that it is due to sexism. However, that may not actually be true due to the fact that media coverage outlets surround and cover what is like popular at the time. And since women's professional sports aren't really that popular, they don't really cover it. And that leads to one of my that leads to something else I found in my research was even though it is believed that sexism is a huge reason why for the lack of support in women's professional sports, more men still account for the majority of the audience than women. And an author of an article I was reading was talking about how women's pro sports, how can any other group or demographic be expected? So I definitely thought that was something interesting, and that may be for the lack of support in women's pro sports.
Okay, I have a question going off of that last fact. Do you think that men's sports are watched more than women's because the men are watching more than women? Like, do you think men prefer to watch men's sports instead, and that's why the demographics are the way they are?
You said again, you went out.
Do you think men's sports are watched more than women's because the men watch more in general than the women do?
Yeah, I definitely think that plays a huge part in it. I think if you look at it, a lot of men are sports fans, and I think that that sports fan in them would draw them to other sports, even if they're like maybe like a basketball fan. The fact that they're a sports fan, I believe they're more likely to kind of like transfer over to other sports as opposed to women. And a part of my research that I saw that women mostly occupy for like the audience of like dramas, like TV dramas, and like, and another thing that was they kind of followed whatever their husband was watching, and that was really like the only reason. That was really like the only way they even tuned into sports.
Gotcha.
And I think that the fact that I think that definitely is correct. That the fact that men are usually into sports more is the reason that more men account for the audience of women's pro sports.
Okay. Thank you very much. Next, we're moving on to Marco. He is going to talk about the salary difference between men and women in sports.
Okay, so I covered the salary difference between men and women's sports, and a good example of the big difference in salary would be the NBA versus the WNBA. And the average salary for the NBA is $4.5 million per year compared to just $72,000 a year for the NBA players. So there's a large marginal error between the salary differences. And this holds true for pretty much every professional sport between men and women. And the only one that is just about equal is tennis. And also, men receive 55% of college scholarships, leaving only 45% to women, which can be discouraging for them to, strive and train harder and, push to be a college athlete when they have less of an opportunity. And although most sports haven't really addressed the inequality, tennis actually has taken steps to even the playing field. Like we said earlier, in 2007, Wimbledon was the first to pay men and women equal prize money. So there are being steps taken, but they're very small steps. And today, the highest paid female athlete is Maria Sharapova, and she earns $29.7 million per year. And most of her money would be coming through endorsements, such as Nike, Porsche, and many others, but not much of her revenue comes from her sport alone. And whereas the top paid male athlete was Floyd Mayweather, and he made 300 million in 1 year. So I mean, you can see the big difference. There's only 2 women within the top 100 highest paid athletes. So there's definitely a big discrepancy there. But there are women out there who do give girls and women hope for the future, such as Ronda Rousey. She was the number 8 female earning athlete last year, and she earned 6.5 million. The reason she gets such a big following is because she is in the UFC, and it is predominantly male dominant, and a lot of girls have been drawn to the sport because of how tough she is, and people really just enjoy watching her. So that's good for women. And another female athlete that has been inspiring for young girls trying to be professional athletes is Monica Abbott, and she is a professional female speed pitcher, and she just signed the most lucrative contract for a female athlete in United States history, and it was 6 years, only $1 million, which is good, but compared to retrospective male contracts, it's really not great. And I've honestly never even heard of professional women's like softball, so that just shows you how much coverage they get. And lastly, to wrap it up, is that there is a scientific difference between male and female bodies, and males have different hormones, and they're able to recover faster, and they have up to more than 30% more muscle in their upper body. So it's really not fair to women because they are born different than men. So that begs the question, that is it fair that they make different money because they are born different?
Gotcha. Thank you. And I have a question going off of that. Do you think women are paid less because they have less viewers and therefore less sponsors because people don't feel the need to advertise their products, especially on women's game days and stuff? Do you think that's the reason they're paid less, or it's because of the women and men salary gap right now?
I would say that media coverage is a big deal because you make a lot of your profit from your fans and the viewers, but it's just the fact that females really don't get as much coverage, and they may not be as competitive or fast or athletic as men, but like I was saying, it's really not fair to them because they are born with different hormones and muscles and everything like that. So it's really not fair, and I think the only way that they could change these things would be if they would, just walk away from sports and say, we're not going to play anymore until, we get a change.
That's good. Is there anything else that anyone wanted to bring up before we conclude this? I think we covered mainly everything. These are the main reasons why we believe that there aren't as many viewers for women's sports as there are for men, therefore resulting in the salary difference too, and why women's sports are less popular in general.